That is not your husband's signature, ma'am, and the man standing next to you is definitely not Silas Vance." I was sitting in the back room of my antique shop on Hennepin Avenue when the phone pressed against my ear delivered those exact words. The caller was Harriet, a notary public I had known for 12 years. My hands were coated in beeswax and fine sawdust. I stared blindly at a 19th century mahogany chair I was in the middle of restoring. "Are you sure, Harriet?" I asked. My voice sounded thin. It belonged to someone else. "Silas, she is standing in my lobby right now," Harriet whispered, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. "She's trying to notarize a transfer deed for your lake cabin. The guy with her just handed me a fake ID with your name on it. Should I call the police?" I closed my eyes. The heavy smell of lemon oil and old dust suddenly made my stomach turn over. "No," I said. "Stall them. Tell them the state registry system is down for maintenance." I hung up the phone. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my brass polishing weight across the brick room. Instead, I opened the security camera feed from my own driveway on my phone. My wife, Gemma, had told me she was taking our 5-year-old son to the pediatric dentist this afternoon. The driveway was empty. But to understand how I ended up sitting in the dark, surrounded by dead people's furniture, preparing to absolutely destroy the woman I loved, I have to take you back. Because the forged signature was just the final, sloppy insult. The real betrayal started 2 years earlier, right under my own roof. I am 37 years old. I make my living pulling forgotten things out of the dark and making them beautiful again. I own Vance and Son Antiquities in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My father started the shop, and his father before him was a clockmaker. I grew up with the smell of shellac and old paper in my blood. My grandfather used to sit at his workbench, fixing broken pocket watches with hands that shook just enough to make you nervous, and he'd always tell me, "A thief always leaves his fingerprints on the lock he didn't pick." I didn't know what that meant when I was 10. I know exactly what it means now. I met Gemma at an estate sale in Edina 7 years ago. She was 28, standing in front of a mid-century teak credenza, arguing with the auctioneer about the price. She had this fierce, impatient energy. She wore sharp coats and walked like she was always 5 minutes late to something important. I was the quiet guy who authenticated the wood. I stepped in, proved the piece was a reproduction, saved her $800, and bought her coffee. 3 years later, we were married. 2 years after that, we had Leo. For a long time, I thought we were the perfect balance. I was the anchor. She was the sail. I liked quiet evenings sanding down dovetail joints. Gemma liked hosting dinner parties, climbing the corporate ladder at her logistics firm, filling our house with people and noise and expensive wine. I had one dream that I kept parked in the back of my mind. There was an abandoned brick firehouse over by Lake Bede-Makaska. For years, I had been saving every extra dollar I made from high-end restorations to buy it. I wanted to turn it into a restoration academy, a place to teach the trade to kids who didn't fit into normal classrooms. Gemma knew about the firehouse. She used to walk by it with me on Sunday mornings, holding my hand, telling me how proud she would be when my name was painted on the brick. God, we were so happy. And the whole time, she was building a second life directly in front of my face. The cracks didn't start with lipstick on a collar or a mysterious late-night phone call. They started with the foundation of our house, literally. Minneapolis winters are brutal, and the frost heave had done a number on our basement. We needed a contractor to dig out the perimeter and reinforce the concrete. Gemma found a guy through her sister, Chloe. His name was Julian Croft. Julian was 40. He drove a lifted black Ford truck that was entirely too clean for a man who claimed to work in dirt. He wore tight black t-shirts and carried himself with that specific kind of unearned arrogance you usually find in guys who peaked playing high school football. I didn't like him. Not out of jealousy, but because I know craftsmen. I know how a man who respects his work treats his tools. Julian threw his levels onto the concrete. He left empty energy drink cans on my antique workbench in the garage. But his quote was cheap, and Gemma insisted. "He's giving us the family discount, Silas," she said one night, standing at the kitchen island, pouring her second glass of Pinot Noir. "Don't be a snob just because he doesn't care about the historical accuracy of a baseboard." I let it go. I didn't know it yet, but ignoring that instinct would cost me 2 years of my life. The basement project was supposed to take 3 weeks. It stretched into 2 months, then 3. There was always a delay, a permit issue, a supply chain problem. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when the physical reality of Julian's presence first truly invaded my sanctuary, bringing with it a sensory assault that I should have recognized as a warning. I was in the garage, working on a 1920s rosewood writing desk. It was a delicate, magnificent piece that required French polishing, a technique that demands absolute focus. The garage was cold, but my hands were warm from the friction. I had a pad of lint-free cotton soaked in denatured alcohol and crushed lac bugs. The smell was sharp, sweet, and overwhelmingly amber. It was the scent of history being preserved. And the only sound in the space was the rhythmic, whispering shh of the cotton pad, gliding over the dense, buttery grain of the rosewood. I was completely at peace. Suddenly, the floor beneath my boots violently shuddered. A deafening, mechanical shriek tore through the silence as Julian activated a heavy-duty masonry saw in the basement directly below me. The vibration traveled up through the concrete slab, rattling my teeth in my skull and shaking the delicate spindled legs of the writing desk. Within seconds, the pristine, amber scent of the shellac was entirely swallowed by a new odor rising from the basement vents. It was the sharp, alkaline, throat-coating stench of pulverized cement. It tasted metallic on my tongue, like old pennies and dry earth. The saw cut off abruptly. A minute later, the heavy fire door connecting the basement to the garage swung open. Julian walked in. His work boots were coated in stark white concrete dust, and with every step, he left a thick, gritty footprint across my meticulously swept floor. He carried a massive, rusted iron pry bar in his right hand. Without asking, without even looking at me, he swung his arm and dropped the heavy iron bar directly onto my secondary workbench. The deafening clang of metal on wood echoed off the aluminum garage doors. He walked over to where I was standing. He didn't wipe his hands. Before I could stop him, he reached out with a bare, calloused hand and dragged his fingers across the corner of the rosewood desk. He left a thick, chalky smear of white dust directly in the center of the wet, pristine finish I had just spent 2 hours laying down. "Please don't touch that," I said, my voice tight, trying to keep my temper in check. "The finish is wet. It's highly sensitive to particulates." Julian looked at his hand, then looked at the smear he had left on the century-old wood. He wiped his dirty palm casually on the thigh of his jeans. He wasn't apologetic. He looked amused. "My bad, boss," he said, a slow, condescending drawl stretching his words. "Just looks like an old table to me. Didn't know we were operating in a sterile environment." Before I could respond, the door to the house opened. Gemma stepped out into the garage. She was wearing a silk blouse and her favorite dark denim. She carried a plate of sliced Honeycrisp apples and a sweating Yeti tumbler of iced tea. She walked right past me. She didn't look at the desk. She didn't look at the ruined finish. She walked directly to Julian, her heels clicking against the concrete, avoiding his dusty footprints with practiced ease. "You must be exhausted," she said to him. Her voice had dropped a register. It was softer, breathier than the voice she used with me. "Just putting in the hours, Jem," Julian said, taking the iced tea from her. His hand brushed hers, a microsecond of contact, a lingering of knuckles. Gemma smiled at him. As she stood there, a sudden draft from the loose garage window caught her hair, carrying her scent directly to me over the table. It was her new perfume, Santal 33. A sharp, expensive, leathery scent. It crashed into the choking, metallic odor of the pulverized concrete dust and the sweet alcohol of my shellac. The combination was nauseating. It smelled like a cover-up. It smelled like expensive, beautiful lies layered over cheap, destructive reality. I stood there, holding my cotton pad, watching my wife feed a contractor in my sanctuary, while my wood finish clouded over and died beneath a layer of his grit. That's when the first small change happened. Gemma had always been a homebody on weekends. Suddenly, she decided she needed to get back in shape. She joined a boutique Pilates studio downtown. She bought $400 worth of new athletic wear. "I just want to feel like myself again," she told me, adjusting a new sports bra in the mirror. I kissed her shoulder. "You look beautiful." She flinched, just a tiny, microscopic stiffening of her spine when my lips touched her skin. I noticed it. I pushed it down. Then came the social change. Gemma's sister, Chloe, started coming around constantly. Chloe was a chaotic 30-year-old who lived on drama. Suddenly, Gemma and Chloe had girls' nights every Thursday. Gemma would come home at midnight, smelling faintly of smoke and that same expensive Santal 33 perfume. And underneath the perfume, if I leaned in close enough, there was the faint, unmistakable chalky scent of drywall dust. The physical changes hit next. Gemma stopped eating the dinners I cooked. She was always too tired or ate a late lunch with clients. Our intimacy didn't just vanish, it became mechanical. When we did sleep together, she kept her eyes closed tight, turning her face away from mine. She was enduring me. Then came the fracture moment. The Sunday morning, my gut screamed at me, and I forced myself to ignore it. I was in the garage, looking for my good tape measure. Julian's tools were scattered across my workbench. I moved his heavy leather tool bag to get to my drawer. When I lifted it, a piece of paper fluttered out and landed by my boot. It was a receipt from a high-end steakhouse in St. Paul, dated the previous Thursday, 9:45 p.m., 2 ribeyes, 2 glasses of the exact Pinot Noir. Gemma drank, paid in cash. Thursday was Gemma's girls' night with Chloe. I stood there in the cold garage, staring at the little slip of paper. My ears started to ring. A cold, heavy stone dropped into my stomach. I walked back into the house. Gemma was at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone. "Hey," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "How was Thursday night with Chloe? What did you guys end up doing?" She didn't look up from her screen. "Oh, you know, just got salads and complained about her boss." "Salads?" I repeated. "Yeah." She finally looked up. "Why?" "No reason." I should have confronted her then. I should have slammed the receipt on the table. But men who accuse their wives of cheating based on a random receipt are paranoid losers. That's what society tells you. You're insecure. You're controlling. I loved my wife. I loved my son. I didn't want the bomb to go off in my living room. So I folded the receipt, put it in my pocket, and went to work. I decided to do one small thing that Sunday. I didn't tell her. I changed the Wi-Fi router settings in our house to log device connection times, and that one small thing broke everything open. 2 weeks later, the log showed Julian's phone connecting to our home network at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in Chicago that night for an estate auction. That was the first confirmation. I sat in my hotel room in Chicago, staring at the router log on my laptop. The physical reaction to absolute betrayal is not cinematic. You don't cry right away. You don't scream. Your mouth goes completely dry, like you've been eating sand. Your vision tunnels. You feel like you are watching a movie of a stranger's life from the back row of a very dark theater. He was in my house. He was in my bed. My 5-year-old son was asleep down the hall. I drove back from Chicago in utter silence. I didn't listen to music. I just watched the highway lines blur into one continuous, sickening streak. When I got home, I initiated the soft confrontation. I needed to test her. Gemma was in the kitchen, making coffee. Julian was allegedly picking up supplies for the day. "Hey," I said, dropping my bags by the door. "Did the security system act up on Tuesday night? I got a weird alert from the app." Gemma froze. The coffee pot hovered an inch above the counter. "No," she said, her voice dropping a half octave. "I didn't hear anything. The house was locked up tight. Leo and I watched a movie and went to bed at 9. She poured the coffee. Her hand was shaking so badly she spilled hot brown liquid over the white quartz counter. I knew. I absolutely knew. That weekend, the gaslight chamber opened. I couldn't hold it in anymore. After Leo went to sleep, I brought up the router logs. I printed them out. I laid the paper on the kitchen island. "Explain this," I said. Gemma looked at the paper, then looked at me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, offended rage. It was a terrifying transformation. The woman I married vanished, replaced by someone cold and reptilian. "Are you tracking my network?" she snapped. "Are you insane, Silas? You're spying on me?" "I'm not spying on you. I'm asking why the contractor's phone was connected to our Wi-Fi at 2 in the morning when I was in another state." "You're being paranoid," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Julian left his tablet here to run a diagnostic on the moisture sensors in the basement. It syncs to the Wi-Fi. You're literally losing your mind." "A tablet?" I asked. "Yes, a tablet. God, Silas, you're obsessed with old things because you can't handle real life. You sit in your little shop dusting off garbage while I actually work to pay our mortgage. And this is how you treat me? You're going through something. We should get you help." She walked away. She left me standing in the kitchen, doubting my own sanity. For 3 days, she subjected me to the silent treatment. When she did speak, it was to drop little verbal grenades. "If you keep this up, I'm taking Leo to my mother's." "Your dad was a paranoid mess too, wasn't he? It's genetic." "Fine. Show me the evidence. You don't have any?" "Exactly. You're embarrassing yourself." I started to break. I really did. I convinced myself I was crazy, that the receipt was a coincidence, that the tablet excuse made sense. And then came the evening of the rainstorm, the night the disrespect finally moved out of the shadows, walked upstairs, and sat right at my kitchen island. I came home from the shop at 6 in the evening. It was pouring rain outside, a heavy, rhythmic drumming that soaked through my coat as I ran from the truck to the porch. I stepped into the house, kicking off my wet boots, expecting the quiet hum of the evening news or the sound of Leo playing in the living room. Leo, I knew, was at a playdate, but the house wasn't quiet. John Mayer was playing softly from the Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen. I walked down the hallway. The smell of seared garlic, butter, and rosemary hit me like a physical blow. It was a rich, complex aroma, a smell Gemma hadn't produced in months. She used to make roast chicken and garlic potatoes on our anniversaries. I stepped into the kitchen. Gemma was standing at the stove, humming lightly, wearing a beautiful cashmere sweater I had bought her for Christmas. Sitting at the kitchen island, occupying one of the expensive, hand-tooled leather bar stools I had personally restored, was Julian. He wasn't working. He was off the clock. He was wearing a clean, tight black Henley. His hair was damp. He looked entirely too fresh, entirely too clean. Whose shower did he just use? I wondered. But the sheer audacity of the scene forced the thought to the back of my mind. Julian was holding a heavy crystal tumbler. It was my grandfather's crystal. Inside the glass was an amber liquid, drowning in cheap ice cubes from our freezer dispenser. It was my Macallan 18-year single malt scotch. "Hey, Silas," Gemma said, not turning around from the stove. She kept stirring the potatoes. Julian stayed late to finish the vapor barrier. It was raining so hard I told him to wait out the storm. I offered him a drink. "I see that," I said. My voice was dangerously flat. Julian took a loud, wet sip. The ice clinked sharply against the antique crystal. Good stuff, man. Really smooth. Usually I'm a Jack Daniels guy, but Gemma said you wouldn't mind sharing the top shelf. You know, since I saved you guys so much on the framing. I felt the heat rising in my neck. The sheer, naked entitlement radiating off the man was suffocating. It's meant to be drank neat, I said, staring directly at the glass. The ice kills the flavor profile. It ruins the intended structure. Julian chuckled. It was a low, guttural, dismissive sound. He looked at Gemma's back, sharing a private joke with her spine. Profile, structure. Listen to this guy. Everything's got to be a science experiment, right? Sometimes you just want a cold drink after doing actual, physical labor all day. Gemma turned around, holding a wooden spoon. She frowned at me. Don't be a snob, Silas. Julian has been breaking his back down there in the damp all week. The least you can do is let him have a drink in peace without giving a lecture on Scottish history. I looked at the space between them, the invisible tether. Julian wasn't acting like a contractor waiting out the rain. He was acting like the man of the house. He was sitting with his legs spread wide, occupying space, dominating the room with a casual, terrifying comfort. Julian set the crystal glass down on the quartz counter. He didn't use a coaster. Gemma was telling me about your hobby, Julian said, his eyes locking onto mine. The antique stuff, fixing up old junk. It's my business, I said slowly. It's a trade. Right, Julian said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Just seems funny, you know? Spending all that time trying to save things that are already dead. In my line of work, if something's rotting, you don't paint over it. You don't try to polish it up and pretend it's new. You take a sledgehammer to it. You tear it down to the dirt. You build something new, something that actually works. He stared directly into my eyes when he said it. It was a blatant, naked challenge. He was testing my boundaries in my own home, drinking my liquor, talking about my wife. Gemma smiled at Julian. It was a soft, admiring, completely genuine smile. Julian has a point, Silas, she said softly. Sometimes you hold on to things way past their expiration date. I stood there, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor. The scent of the garlic, the expensive scotch, the subtle, suffocating arrogance in the room. It formed a toxic cloud. I looked at the man tearing down my foundation and the woman cheering him on. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said quietly. Some things just need to be torn down. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them to their private world. 2 days later, the second discovery hit. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Gemma was in the shower. Her phone was on the nightstand. She had changed her passcode 3 months ago, claiming Leo kept locking her out. But she was careless. A notification lit up the locked screen. It wasn't a text message. It was an Apple Wallet notification. Payment of $450 to the St. Regis Hotel declined. Insufficient funds. The St. Regis was downtown, 10 minutes away. I picked up the phone. I didn't know the passcode, but I didn't need to. I looked at the emergency contact list accessible from the lock screen. She had changed my contact name from Silas to Home. But there was a new emergency contact. JC. I put the phone down exactly where I found it. I walked out of the bedroom. I went down to the basement, where the drywall was half finished. I stood in the center of the concrete floor and let the darkness wash over me. The trickle truth began that night. I sat her down. I didn't yell. I kept my voice dead flat. I saw the St. Regis notification on your phone. Don't lie to me again. Don't tell me I'm crazy. Rung 1. She burst into tears. Real, heavy, theatrical tears. Nothing happened, Silas. I swear. I was just stressed. I booked a room for myself just to get away for a night. I didn't go. A room for yourself, I repeated. Yes, just to sleep. Rung 2. Gemma, I know about Julian. I know. I didn't actually have concrete proof of the affair yet, just circumstantial evidence, but I played the card. She stopped crying instantly. The tears just vanished. "Okay," she whispered. "He was just giving me a ride to the bank a few times. We flirted. It was just text messages. I like the attention." "Text messages." Rung 3. "Okay, we kissed once. In his truck, after he finished the framing. I felt sick about it. I told him it could never happen again." Rung 4. "It's been 6 months," she finally said, her voice turning hard, defensive. "But it's just physical, Silas. You and I haven't been ourselves for longer than that. You're always at the shop. You care more about that stupid firehouse dream than you do about me." 6 months, I said. My voice was a rasp. "Yes, but I was going to end it." That was the lie. It wasn't 6 months, and she wasn't going to end it. The cruelest moment came 2 days later. We were living in a state of Cold War. We hadn't told Leo. We were pretending for the kid. I walked into the living room and Gemma was sitting on the couch, watching Julian out the window as he loaded his truck. "Why him?" I asked quietly. "He's a joke, Gemma. He leaves trash in our house. He does shoddy work." She didn't look at me. She kept watching him. "Because he's a real man, Silas," she said. The cruelty in her voice was casual, like she was discussing the weather. "He builds things. He makes things happen in the real world. You just sit in your shop and polish the past. Julian is actually teaching Leo how to use tools, since you just stare at old junk. She used my son. She used my trade. She drove the knife in and twisted it with both hands. Something broke inside me in that exact second. It wasn't an explosion. It was an internal click. A heavy vault door swinging shut and locking. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my work. I just looked at her and realized she was entirely hollow. The woman I loved had never existed. She was a projection. "Okay," I said. I turned around and walked out of the room. What I did next, nobody saw coming. Not her, not Julian, not her sister Chloe, who had been providing the alibi for 2 years. I went completely compliant. I apologized. I told Gemma I understood why she felt neglected. I told her I wanted to go to marriage counseling. I played the broken, pathetic, desperate husband. It disgusted me, but it was tactical. I needed her to drop her guard, because what nobody knew was that I had already hired Marcus. Marcus was a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset uncoupling. I didn't just meet with him. I handed him my entire life. I told him I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I filed. "She's sloppy," Marcus told me across his mahogany desk. "Cheaters who think their spouses are weak always get sloppy. They stop covering their tracks because they don't respect the person they're deceiving." He was right. While Gemma thought I was busy writing her apology letters and researching couples retreats, I was executing a quiet, forensic disassembly of our life. I started moving my most valuable antique inventory. Pieces I owned outright, a 17th century French armoire, a collection of original Tiffany lamps. I quietly transferred to a climate-controlled storage unit under my business LLC, which she had no legal access to. Then I found my secret ally, Chloe's husband, Mark. Mark was a good guy, a high school math teacher who always looked exhausted by Chloe's constant drama. I met him for a beer at a dive bar in St. Paul. "I know, Silas," Mark said, before I even took a sip. He looked sick to his stomach. "Chloe's been covering for her. They use our house as the alibi. Gemma comes over, parks her car, and Julian picks her up at the end of the block." Mark handed me a manila folder. Inside were screenshots of text messages between Chloe and Gemma. "Gemma, Silas is being whiny again. Tell him I fell asleep on your couch if he calls." Chloe, "Gotta have fun with Jay. Don't do anything I wouldn't do." I added the folder to the heavy fireproof lockbox I kept hidden in the shop. But the affair wasn't the endgame. The affair was just the motive. The real crime, the one that was going to destroy her, was financial. My grandfather's quote echoed in my head. A thief always leaves his fingerprints on the lock he didn't pick. I had given Marcus authorization to audit our joint accounts. A week later, he called me into his office. He didn't look happy. "Silas," Marcus said, sliding a thick stack of banking documents across the desk. "Your wife isn't just sleeping with the contractor. She's funding him." I stared at the papers. "What do you mean? She's 3 weeks ago, an LLC registered to Julian Croft applied for a commercial property loan. The down payment listed on the application is $715,400. I blinked. $715,400? We don't have that much liquid cash. "No," Marcus said grimly. "You don't. But you have a joint investment portfolio worth $300,000, and you own the lake cabin outright, and your primary home has $400,000 in equity." Marcus tapped the paper. "She's been quietly liquidating the investments, and yesterday, a request was initiated with your bank to pull a massive equity line on the primary house. The destination account for all these funds is a new joint checking account. The names on that account are Gemma Vance and Julian Croft." My blood ran cold. She wasn't just leaving me. She was going to strip me to the studs. She was going to take the money I had worked for, the equity in the home I maintained, and use it to buy a new life with the man who left energy drink cans on my workbench. "Can she do that?" I asked. "Not without your signature," Marcus said. "She needs your authorization for the home equity line, and she needs your signature to transfer the cabin deed to leverage it." And that brings us back to phase 1, to the phone call in the back of my antique shop. "That is not your husband's signature, ma'am." When Harriet the notary called me to say Gemma and Julian were in her lobby with a fake ID trying to forge my signature on the cabin deed, I knew the trap was fully set. I told Harriet to stall them. I hung up. I washed the beeswax off my hands. I put on my coat. I picked the date. I picked the time. I picked the room. I didn't confront them at the notary. I let Harriet tell them the system was down and they needed to come back next week. I let Gemma come home that night, kiss me on the cheek, and tell me she had a stressful day at work. I smiled. I cooked her dinner. I was the perfect, oblivious husband. 2 days later, she was served with divorce papers at her office. Gemma lost her mind. She called me screaming, threatening to take Leo, threatening to ruin my business, claiming she was going to tell the judge I was abusive. I didn't answer. I just let it go to voicemail. Every single threat was recorded. She hired a vicious, expensive lawyer. She demanded half of everything, half the shop, half the cabin, full custody of Leo. She claimed the $715,400 she was trying to move was for authorized marital investments, and that I had verbally agreed to it, which led us to the deposition. It was a Tuesday morning in October. The conference room in Marcus's downtown office smelled like leather bindings, stale coffee, and the sharp metallic ozone from the copy machine down the hall. I sat in a high-backed chair, staring at the grain of the conference table. I noticed immediately that it wasn't solid wood. It was a cheap laminate veneer made to look like solid oak, a surface-level lie. It was an incredibly fitting stage for what was about to happen. A heavy wall clock ticked above the door, a rhythmic, unrelenting clack, clack, clack. With every second that passed, I felt another invisible string tying me to Gemma Snap. For 7 years, this woman had been my entire center of gravity. I remembered the night we brought Leo home from the hospital, how she had cried from pure exhaustion, how I had held her feet in my lap and promised her I would always keep our foundation strong. I remembered the scent of her hair, the exact cadence of her laugh when she was genuinely surprised. I tried to find that woman in the room. She wasn't there. Gemma sat across from me. She was wearing a sharp beige blazer, her hair pulled back into a severe, perfect knot. She looked beautiful, cold and incredibly smug. She was adjusting her gold watch, her fingers moving with the casual arrogance of a predator who believes the prey has already surrendered. There was no trace of the woman who had cried in our nursery. The person sitting across from me was a stranger wearing my wife's face. Her lawyer, a guy who looked like he spent too much time on golf courses, was leaning back in his chair, tapping a silver pen against his legal pad. Julian was there too, subpoenaed as a third-party witness regarding the contractor payments. He wore a cheap, off-the-rack gray suit that didn't fit his broad shoulders. He looked bored, chewing a piece of gum with his mouth slightly open. "Mr. Vance," Gemma's lawyer started, his voice dripping with practiced condescension. "My client asserts that the liquidation of the marital investment accounts and the pending equity draw were discussed with you extensively. She claims you authorized these moves to fund a new real estate venture." "I never authorized it," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. "Do you have proof of that?" The lawyer smirked, leaning forward. "Because my client has digital authorization logs showing the bank transfers were approved directly from your home network." Gemma smiled, a tiny, triumphant lifting of the corner of her mouth. She crossed her legs, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. She thought she had me. She thought her little Wi-Fi trick was foolproof, that she had outsmarted the quiet guy who played with old clocks. I didn't look at Marcus. I kept my eyes locked on Gemma. I wanted to memorize this exact second. I wanted to remember the absolute peak of her hubris. I didn't feel a cinematic rush of vengeance. I didn't feel the hot, fiery thrill of revenge. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness. I was about to drop an anvil on the mother of my child, and she had handed me the rope to do it. Marcus cleared his throat. The sound seemed entirely too loud in the quiet room. He slowly opened a thick manila folder. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice smooth as glass, "we do have proof." Marcus slid a document across the laminate veneer table. It was heavily redacted, stamped with the imposing blue logo of U.S. Bank's fraud division. The paper rustled softly, a terrible, final sound. When Mrs. Vance attempted to forge my client's signature at a notary public 2 weeks ago, an event we have on high-definition security video, we filed an emergency injunction and subpoenaed the bank's security logs for the $715,400 transfer. Gemma's smile vanished. The confident posture dissolved. Julian stopped chewing his gum. He sat up straight, the cheap fabric of his suit pulling tight across his chest. "Mrs. Vance," Marcus continued, looking directly at her, his eyes entirely devoid of mercy, "you claimed Mr. Vance authorized these transfers from his home office. However, this bank-level forensic IP trace shows the dual-factor authentication for the $715,400 transfer was indeed approved on your home Wi-Fi, but it wasn't approved from Mr. Vance's computer." Marcus slid a second piece of paper forward. He tapped it once with his index finger. "The MAC address, the unique, unalterable hardware identifier of the specific device that authorized the theft of $750,000, belongs to an iPhone 13 Pro. We ran the registry." Marcus turned his eyes slowly, deliberately, to the contractor. "It matches the device currently sitting in Mr. Croft's pocket." The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a physical weight. You could feel it pressing against your eardrums, sucking the oxygen out of the air. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to amplify, ringing out like gunshots in the sterile room. I watched the blood drain from Gemma's face. I watched the exact moment her reality fractured. The smugness didn't just fade, it shattered, replaced by the hollow, wide-eyed terror of a cornered animal realizing the trap had jaws. "Furthermore," Marcus said, twisting the knife with professional precision, "the timestamp of the authorization is 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Mr. Vance was in Chicago. We have his hotel receipts and flight logs. So, Mr. Croft, you were in my client's home, on his network, authorizing a fraudulent wire transfer to your own LLC." Julian's face went the color of wet cement. He looked at Gemma. The romantic illusion, the arrogant facade of the real man who builds things, instantly evaporated into sheer, pathetic panic. "You said it was clean," Julian hissed at her, completely forgetting the lawyers were there. His voice was shrill. "You said you used his old laptop." "Shut up, Julian," Gemma snapped, panic finally bleeding into her voice, her perfect composure snapping into pieces. "No, you shut up," Julian yelled, standing up so fast his chair slammed backward into the wall. "I'm not going to prison for wire fraud, because you don't know how a router works." Her own lawyer put his head in his hands, slowly massaging his temples. He knew it was over. He knew he was looking at a criminal conspiracy. Gemma looked at me. The smugness was gone. The coldness was gone. She looked terrified. She looked like a stranger who had just stepped off a ledge and realized there was no net waiting at the bottom. "Silas," she whispered. Her voice broke, a desperate, pleading sound. "Silas, please." I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. I looked at the woman I had built a life with, the woman who had mocked my trade, let a stranger disrespect me in my own kitchen, and tried to steal my future. "You can keep the contractor," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a man whose foundation was finally solid again. "I'm keeping my son." I walked out of the room. I didn't look back. The cascade happened faster than I expected. Once the affair became real life, with real consequences, the romance died instantly. Julian realized he was looking at federal wire fraud charges because of the bank trace. To save his own skin, he flipped on Gemma. He gave a full statement to the police detailing how she had orchestrated the forgery and the transfers. The criminal investigation froze all of Gemma's assets. She was fired from her logistics firm when the fraud charges became public. Her company didn't want a liability managing their accounts. Chloe, her sister, tried to defend her to the family. But when Mark handed over the text messages proving Chloe had been an active accomplice to the affair, Mark filed for divorce too. Chloe had to move back in with their mother. Gemma avoided jail time by pleading down to a lesser charge of attempted financial fraud. But the conditions of her plea, combined with the forensic evidence, meant the divorce was a slaughter. She got nothing. The premarital assets remained mine. The investments were returned. Because of the criminal charges, the family court judge awarded me primary physical and legal custody of Leo. Gemma gets supervised visitation every other weekend. She lives in a small studio apartment in St. Louis Park now. She works as a dispatcher for a local trucking company. Julian left the state entirely. I heard he moved to Arizona to live with his brother. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in front of the old brick firehouse by Lake Betamakaska. I had the keys in my hand. The $715,400 that was almost stolen from me was sitting safely in my accounts, ready to be used to build the Restoration Academy. Leo was running around the empty bay where the fire trucks used to park, his laughter echoing off the brick walls. I looked down at my hands. They were coated in beeswax and sawdust. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My grandfather was right. A thief always leaves his fingerprints on the lock he didn't pick. It's 9 p.m. now, 3 years later. I'm the only one home in the firehouse loft. My phone is on the workbench, face up, and nobody is going to text me a lie tonight.